Chapter 1. Reveille Arrest. The sharp clang of the bugle cut through the pre-dawn stillness, dragging Colonel Derrick Morrison from a restless sleep. For most on base, Reveille was routine, the day's first salute to discipline and order. For Derrick, it had always been something more. A personal promise to uphold everything the uniform stood for. Sunlight had barely touched the window blinds as he swung his legs out of bed, rubbing the weight of fatigue from his eyes. He reached for his neatly folded fatigues on the chair beside his nightstand. Years of habit made his movements automatic, calm, measured, efficient. From the adjoining bathroom, the quiet hum of the shower's last drip echoed, evidence that Linda had been up earlier than him. Probably with the kids. Amy and Tyler's school started early today. He allowed himself a faint smile, the kind that never quite reaches eyes these days. But as soon as his boot laces were tied, the quiet order shattered. Military police. Open up. A fist pounded on the front door, shaking the frame. Before Morrison could process the intrusion, the door burst inward with a violent crash, splinters raining onto the polished hardwood floor. Colonel Morrison, step away from the furniture. Hands where we can see them. The voice was harsh, commanding, unmistakably serious. Two armed MPs stormed into the bedroom, their sidearms drawn. A third officer, a stern-faced lieutenant, followed closely behind, holding a set of manila folders under one arm and a pair of handcuffs in the other. For a moment, Morrison just stared at them, his mind struggling to close the gap between reality and absurdity. "Colonel Morrison, sir," the lieutenant said, his voice strained with the discomfort of what he was about to do, "you are under arrest for treason against the United States of America." Derrick blinked once. Then again, the words echoed like distant thunder. "Treason," he repeated, his voice calm, almost curious. "Yes, sir," the lieutenant continued, avoiding eye contact. "We have sworn affidavits, sir, testimonies from your wife and your children. That hit harder than any bullet ever could." For a split second, Derrick's chest tightened. Amy? Tyler? His own children? But outwardly, his expression remained unreadable, stone cold. "On whose orders?" Morrison asked quietly. "Direct orders from base command. Your arrest was authorized last night. Would it take you in immediately for questioning?" The second MP, a burly sergeant, stepped forward, cautiously lowering his weapon. "Sir, please place your hands behind your back." For a long, tense moment, Morrison considered the situation. Fight or comply? But even now, stripped of control, instinct told him, stay calm, stay calculating. Slowly, deliberately, he turned around and crossed his wrists behind his back. "Do what you must, Sergeant." The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists as they clicked shut. As they secured him, he asked, voice low and level, "Are my wife and children safe?" The lieutenant hesitated. "They are. Cooperating fully, sir. They're safe." That word, cooperating, twisted in his gut like a knife. From a hallway, hushed voices filtered in. Soldiers from nearby quarters had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Reveille still echoed faintly across the base, but now it was mixed with murmurs of disbelief. "Is that Morrison? Colonel Morrison? No way. Has to be a mistake. Treason? I don't buy it." The MPs led him down the hall. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if invisible chains were dragging behind him. Linda appeared at the end of the hallway, standing by the kitchen doorway. Her expression was unreadable, half sorrow, half triumph, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She wore a thin robe over her nightdress, as if she hadn't quite decided whether to mourn or gloat. Amy and Tyler peeked from behind her, their faces pale and hesitant. Amy clutched a stuffed rabbit close to her chest, and Tyler stood slightly behind his sister, his fists clenched at his sides. Morrison looked at them, his family, his world, and saw only strangers staring back at him. "Daddy." Amy's voice trembled. "Why did you do it?" Her words landed like a punch to the ribs. Derrick met her gaze, steady and quiet. "Sweetheart, sometimes things aren't what they seem." Linda scoffed, cutting him off. "Don't lie to her now, Derrick. You've done enough damage." The lieutenant motioned for the MPs to keep moving. As they stepped past his family, Derrick paused for the briefest second. "Linda," he said, his voice cold as steel, "you'll regret this." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the house eerily silent. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting harsh light across the rows of saluting soldiers lined up for the morning assembly. But their eyes weren't on the flag, they were on him. Gasps and whispered rumors spread like wildfire. "Sir, they got Morrison. What's going on? He's a war hero. His own family testified. This has to be some kind of mistake." The MPs walked briskly, Morrison sandwiched between them, his boots crunching against the gravel. Heads turned. Some saluted out of instinct. Others simply watched in stunned silence. For the first time in his career, Colonel Derrick Morrison didn't return the salute. The wind carried the lingering notes of the bugle, fading into an uneasy quiet as the MPs led him away, leaving behind only whispered confusion and the first cracks of a legacy beginning to fracture. Chapter 2. One phone call. The ride to the station was long, cold, and silent. Colonel Derrick Morrison sat in the back of the armored vehicle, hands cuffed tightly in front of him, wrists raw from the metal's bite. Two MPs sat across from him, their faces tense, their eyes flickering between duty and doubt. Neither spoke. The vehicle rumbled over uneven roads as the base grew distant in the rearview mirror. Morrison stared out through the small window slit, watching as the familiar barracks, the mess hall, and the training fields faded from sight. The place he had served for over 2 decades now felt farther away than ever. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breathing. They think they've won. But the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Arrival at the station, the military station, was a concrete fortress, all sharp corners and sterile walls. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly white glow. As soon as Morrison stepped inside, soldiers fell silent, conversations dying mid-sentence. The whispers followed him down the corridors. "Colonel Morrison? Treason charges, right? I don't believe it." The MPs led him through a maze of security checkpoints, keycard access doors, and sterile hallways lined with cameras. Morrison walked with quiet dignity, shoulders squared, despite the cuffs biting into his wrists. Finally, they shoved him into a holding cell, a steel box with nothing but a metal bench bolted to the floor and a single wall-mounted phone behind a thick protective shield. The lieutenant from earlier, Lieutenant Park, stood outside the bars, clipboard in hand, avoiding eye contact. "You'll be processed shortly, Colonel," Park muttered, flipping through forms. "Then questioning by intelligence. Until then, sit tight." Morrison sat down slowly, resting his forearms on his knees. He stared at the floor, calm but calculating. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I want my phone call." Park blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, we haven't, that hasn't been cleared yet. You're facing federal charges. Standard procedure is on hold pending your first hearing." Morrison tilted his head slightly, his voice low but firm. "It's my right. Or do I need to remind you of UCMJ Article 31? Park sighed, hesitating. It was true. Even suspected traitors had rights. After a long pause, Park gave a curt nod. "Fine. One call. Make it quick. And no funny business. This line's monitored." Morrison rose slowly, his chains clinking softly with each movement. They unlocked his cuffs, but left his ankles shackled. Park handed him the receiver. "Who are you calling, sir?" Park asked, pen hovering over his clipboard. Morrison cradled the phone against his ear, his voice like cold steel. "It's none of your business." The line rang twice, then a curt voice answered. "Defense Department secure line. Identify yourself." Morrison took a steady breath. He knew the words by heart. They were arranged months ago in preparation for the scenario no one else thought could happen. "This is Morrison. Code black. Broken compass. Bearings off by 30 degrees. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Confirm. Repeat last." Morrison repeated, slower this time. "Broken compass. Bearings off by 30 degrees. The line went dead for 3 seconds. Then another voice came on. A deeper voice, colder, unmistakably authoritative. "Colonel Morrison, this is Secretary West. Derrick's fingers tightened around the receiver. Sir, the situation has escalated to Phase 3. The assets have moved against me. Full compromise inside the family unit. Requesting immediate extraction and activation of countermeasure protocol. There was a pause. The secretary spoke with calculated weight. Phase 3. Are you certain? Beyond doubt, sir. My wife and children have filed false testimony. The predator is embedded within my chain of command. I suspect the leak has reached the outer channels. They think I'm neutralized. The secretary exhaled slowly, then said in a voice like a sword being drawn from its scabbard, Stand by, Colonel. Operation Silent Aegis is now in play. For a moment, neither man spoke. The weight of what they had just set into motion hung heavy in the air. Do you require legal representation for the interim? The secretary finally asked. No, sir. I require only your trust. The secretary's voice softened, but the resolve beneath it remained like steel. You have it. Sit tight, Morrison. The cavalry's coming. Then the line clicked dead. Morrison gently hung up the receiver, his pulse steady. The hardest part was done. He turned back toward Lieutenant Park, who stared at him with wide, confused eyes. What the hell was that about? Park asked, frowning. Morrison sat down on the bench, wrists resting calmly on his knees. His gaze was distant, unreadable. I told you, he said simply. None of your business. The MPs exchanged glances. Something in Morrison's voice chilled them more than if he had shouted. It wasn't arrogance or defiance. It was the quiet confidence of a man who knew more than anyone else in the room. Park cleared his throat, masking his unease behind the shuffle of paperwork. Well, you'll be staying here until further notice. Intelligence will debrief you soon. Don't get too comfortable. Morrison leaned back against the cold concrete wall, staring at the ceiling as if seeing beyond it. Comfort had never been his concern. The room fell silent again, the faint hum of the overhead lights filling the void. Outside the station walls, gears were already turning. Invisible threads of power shifting behind the curtain of protocol and procedure. They thought he was finished. They thought they'd broken him. They couldn't have been more wrong. Chapter 3. The secretary arrives. The sterile silence of the holding cell was broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Derrick Morrison sat alone, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as the moments ticked by. He wasn't counting the minutes. He already knew how long it would take. 60 minutes. No more, no less. That's how long the Secretary of Defense needed to mobilize, clear the airspace, and land on this remote base. Outside his cell, Lieutenant Park paced the corridor, stealing uneasy glances through the small window. The lieutenant's earlier bravado had faded, replaced by doubt gnawing at the edge of his conscience. From the other side of the base, faint radio chatter crackled through the comms. Unscheduled inbound. Repeat, unscheduled inbound. Clearance override. Identification confirmed. Level Black Authority. Stand by. The MPs at the security gate scrambled as a blacked-out convoy thundered onto the base. Military-grade SUVs, darkened windows, and armored plates bore no insignia save for a single flag on the lead vehicle, the emblem of the Department of Defense. Inside the lead SUV sat a man whose very presence demanded obedience. Secretary of Defense William H. West, known for his icy composure and unwavering loyalty to the Constitution. He stepped out of the vehicle like a storm in human form, 6'2", gray hair cut sharp against his temples, steely blue eyes scanning the surroundings like a predator assessing its domain. Where's Colonel Morrison? He barked, his voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. The MPs at the gate snapped to attention, one nearly fumbling his salute. Sir, Colonel Morrison is secured in holding Cell Bravo, per orders from Base Command. Those orders, the secretary snapped, stepping closer, were fraudulent. The MP's face drained of color. Escort me. Now. The storm breaks the entourage, swept through the station, boots echoing against the concrete as soldiers and officers scrambled to clear the corridors. Eyes widened, whispers sparked, but no one dared to stop them. In the holding wing, Lieutenant Park looked up sharply as the double doors slammed open. Secretary West? Park stammered, caught between a salute and a bow. Sir, this area is... West waved him off like an irritating fly. Stand aside, Lieutenant. But, sir, we're in the middle of an ongoing investigation. Protocol dictates. The Secretary's glare could have frozen lava. Son, I wrote the protocol. Open the damn door. Swallowing hard, Park fumbled with his keys, unlocked the cell, and swung the door wide. Morrison stood slowly, his expression calm, but in his eyes burned a quiet fire of vindication. Colonel Morrison, the Secretary said, voice leveling to a steady tone. At ease. You're free to go. A silence fell across the room like a dropped curtain. The MPs stared, dumbfounded. What? Park gasped. Sir, we have sworn testimony, signed affidavits from his wife and children. He's facing treason charges. How? West turned to face Park squarely. Testimony based on lies. Orchestrated by a covert espionage ring operating under our noses. Colonel Morrison was working an authorized counterintelligence op. He's not the traitor. He let the words sink in, cold and final. The real traitor is still out there. Park stumbled back a step, the clipboard nearly slipping from his grasp. Sir. Then. Who? The Secretary's lips thinned to a grim line. Linda Morrison. Gasps rippled through the MPs like an electric current. Colonel Morrison's wife has been passing sensitive information to an enemy asset inside this base. Information she obtained through manipulation and deceit. She orchestrated his arrest to clear the path for further leaks. Morrison clenched his fists at his sides, but said nothing. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, the weight of betrayal pressed against his ribs like a vice. West turned to him with a flicker of empathy beneath his steel exterior. Colonel, I know this cuts deep, but duty demands we finish this. Morrison nodded once, slow and controlled. Understood, sir. The Secretary snapped his fingers. Sergeant, Lieutenant, secure Linda Morrison immediately. Bring her in alive. Full restraint. Do not alert her ahead of time. The MPs scrambled into action, their earlier confusion replaced by military precision. The arrest minutes later, the front door of Morrison's home slammed open once again. This time, the storm carried with it the full weight of justice. Linda was in the kitchen, coffee cup in hand, wearing a composed smile, until she heard the footsteps. What the hell is this? She demanded as the MPs poured into the room. Why are you back? I already gave my statement. Lieutenant Park stepped forward, face pale but resolute. Linda Morrison, by order of the Secretary of Defense, you're under arrest for espionage and treason against the United States of America. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. No, this is a mistake. My husband, he's the traitor. He's been feeding them enough. Park's voice cut sharp. We know everything. Hands behind your back. 2 MPs moved in, snapping the cuffs on her wrists as she struggled against them. You're arresting me? After everything I did to protect my family, she screamed, voice cracking. What about the children? Outside, Derrick stood beneath the early morning sun, his face a mask of stone. From the doorway, Linda caught sight of him, her husband, her enemy, and the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. You did this. You set me up. Derrick met her gaze, cold and unflinching. His voice was quiet but razor-sharp. No, you did this to yourself. Tears blurred her vision, her voice breaking between sobs and fury. Amy, Tyler, they'll hate you for this. Morrison's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but his voice stayed steady. Maybe, but at least they'll grow up free. The MPs hauled her down the front steps, her cries echoing across the courtyard. Soldiers and officers gathered in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. Murmurs filled the air, confusion mingling with disbelief. His wife was the spy. How long has this been going on? Jesus, no one saw this coming. Derrick stood alone as Linda was forced into the back of the armored vehicle, the cuffs biting into her wrists, her cries fading behind the slamming door. The betrayal cut deep, slicing away what little remained of the man beneath the uniform. But there was no time for grief now. Duty demanded his strength. And so, as the convoy drove away, Morrison remained where he was, shoulders squared against the rising sun, knowing this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. Betrayal Uncovered. The late-night air in Morrison's study had grown thick with unspoken suspicions. A single desk lamp cast long shadows across military files, deployment maps, and classified reports. But tonight, it wasn't the battlefield that weighed on Colonel Derrick Morrison's mind. It was his own home. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as whispers of doubt gnawed at him. Linda's late returns, muffled phone calls, the way she smiled too easily at Captain Blake Hoffman during last month's officer gala. At first, Morrison had dismissed it as paranoia. War changes a man's lens. You start seeing enemies where there are none. But this had roots. The final crack had come 3 weeks ago when he found a crumpled hotel receipt hidden beneath the bathroom sink. Paid in cash, checked out the same weekend he was deployed. A single guest, L. Morrison. The name burned like acid on his tongue. But suspicion alone was weakness. Morrison needed proof. A friend in the shadows entered Tony Riggs, intelligence officer, war buddy, and one of the few men Morrison still trusted. When Morrison approached him in the dim recesses of the secure comms room, he wasted no time. "Tony, I need you to tail someone for me." Tony frowned, arms crossed over his chest. "You're pulling me into marital problems, D." "It's bigger than that," Morrison replied quietly. "I think she's leaking intel, and I think Hoffman's involved." Riggs blinked. "Blake Hoffman? He's one of your men." "Exactly," Morrison said, his voice tightening. "That's what makes it worse." Riggs sighed, scratching his beard. "You understand what you're asking me to do? Surveillance on your own wife? This isn't some off-book affair, D. If we're wrong, you'll burn bridges you'll never rebuild." Morrison met his gaze without flinching. "If I'm wrong, I'll apologize. If I'm right, I can't let it destroy this base." Tony nodded reluctantly. "All right, give me 72 hours. I'll plan surveillance, tap her calls, track Hoffman's movements. But after this, win or lose, we're square." "Deal." The proof 2 days later, Riggs slid a flash drive across Morrison's desk without a word. Morrison hesitated before plugging it in. A part of him still hoped it was all a mistake. The first video played. Low-res security footage from a downtown hotel. There they were, Linda and Hoffman, laughing, kissing in the dim glow of the parking lot. Hoffman's hand resting a little too comfortably on her hip as they entered the lobby. Morrison clenched his jaw until it ached. Another clip, audio this time, recorded in their home while Morrison was still overseas. Linda's voice. "He leaves the files in his study drawer, second compartment. You said that's the one you needed, right?" Blake's voice, smooth and confident. "Exactly. You're doing great, babe. Once we have that file, it's all downhill from here." Morrison's stomach twisted. It wasn't just infidelity. It was treason. The manipulation, but the worst came next. Another recording, this time in the living room. Linda's voice, soft and coaxing, speaking to their children, Amy, just 12, and Tyler, barely 10. "Amy, sweetheart, Daddy's been making some dangerous decisions. He's working with people who could hurt our family if we're not careful. That's why Mommy needs your help. If you ever see Daddy with special folders or talking on the phone late at night, I need you to tell me, okay? It's to keep us safe." Amy's small voice, hesitant but trusting. "Okay, Mommy, I'll help." Tyler chimed in. "I'll watch too. I don't want Daddy to hurt anyone." Morrison pressed pause, his hand trembling. His heart pounded so violently it drowned out the hum of the room. She had turned his children against him. Not just an affair, not just espionage. She had poisoned their home. The confrontation that night, Morrison sat alone in the darkened living room, waiting. Linda returned shortly after midnight, slipping in through the front door with rehearsed quiet. "Late meeting?" Morrison asked, his voice slicing through the silence. She froze. For a second, just one fleeting second, her face betrayed panic. But she recovered fast, slipping into her well-practiced smile. "You startle me. I told you, the PDA ran late tonight." Morrison stood, arms crossed, watching her like a wolf watches a trap, spring shut. "I've been to those meetings, Linda. They don't last till midnight. And they sure as hell don't end at the Fairmont Hotel." Her smile cracked, ever so slightly. "Are you spying on me now?" she shot back, defensive. "Paranoia much, Colonel. Call it survival instinct." The room fell cold and still. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Linda's expression softened, almost pitying. "I didn't want it to be like this, Derrick, but you left me no choice." "No choice." His voice rose, sharp and raw. "You slept with one of my officers and leaked national secrets to God knows who, and you think that's justified?" She stared at him, unblinking. "I did what I had to do." "You're so blinded by your duty, you forgot how to be a husband, a father." Blake listened. He cared. Morrison laughed, a cold, hollow sound. He cared about classified troop movements and weapons contracts. "You were a means to an end." She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. The children turned the next morning. He tried to reach Amy and Tyler before the rot spread further. He sat them down in the kitchen, the sun casting warm light across their innocent faces. For a moment, they looked so small, so far removed from the world of betrayal and war. But innocence doesn't survive deception. "Amy, Tyler," he began gently. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Your mother, she's been misled by someone dangerous. I need you to trust me." Amy shook her head, her voice small but resolute. "Mommy said to the dangerous one. She said you work with bad people. She said we have to protect her." Tyler nodded, fists clenched. "She said you lied to us." The words crushed him more than the treason ever could. Morrison swallowed the lump in his throat. He forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I love you both, more than anything. Please remember that." But they just stared at him, their trust slipping further away. And in that moment, Morrison knew. Blake Hoffman hadn't just stolen secrets. He'd stolen his family's hearts. Chapter 5. The Spy Ring. In the windowless back room of the intelligence office, the hum of encrypted servers filled the silence between two soldiers who knew far too much. Tony Riggs leaned over a laptop, eyes scanning through intercepted emails, surveillance footage, and coded transmissions, the glow casting shadows across his tired face. Morrison stood at his side, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Here's the thing, D," Riggs muttered, scrolling through another decrypted message. "This isn't just Blake running rogue. He's not working alone." The screen displayed a web of names, bank transfers, and foreign IP addresses, an intricate network far beyond simple adultery and betrayal. Morrison narrowed his eyes. "How big are we talking?" Riggs sighed, rubbing his temples. "We've got at least 3 foreign handlers. Signals intelligence points to Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Whoever's on the receiving end of these leaks has been paying well, offshore accounts, crypto wallets, shell companies in Dubai. Blake's just one node in a much larger network." "And Linda?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. Riggs hesitated. Then he clicked a video file. Linda's voice filled the room. Confident. Smooth. "Tell your contact that the shipment schedule is accurate." Colonel Morrison suspects nothing. He's too busy playing soldier to notice his wife taking care of business. Morrison turned away from the screen, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Riggs looked up at him. "She's neck deep in it, D. This isn't some damsel in distress story. She's been feeding them intel for months. Maybe years." Silence stretched between them, heavy as steel. "So what's the endgame?" Morrison finally asked. "What do they want?" "Destabilization," Riggs said. "Our satellite deployments. New weapons trials. Troop movements in conflict zones. They're creating chaos wherever they can. And you were their biggest obstacle." Morrison laughed bitterly, the sound cold and sharp. "So they made me the villain. Use my wife, my kids. Turn my whole life into a weapon against me." Riggs nodded solemnly. "You're the perfect fall guy. High clearance, decorated career, rumored temper. It all fits the narrative. If they take you down, who's going to stop them?" Morrison stared at the wall, a plan already forming in his mind. Then we flipped the script. The trap in the dim security room. Morrison laid out the bait. He met with Riggs late into the night, hunched over schematics and personnel lists. Their voices were low, measured. "We make them think they've won," Morrison explained. "I'll take the fall. Let them have their proof. Let them file their testimonies. Hell, let them have me arrested right in front of the base." Riggs frowned deeply. That's suicide, Derrick. Once you're in custody, you're cut off. You won't be able to control the narrative. Morrison's gaze hardened. I don't need to control it. I just need to shine a light on it. As soon as they think I'm gone, they'll start making moves, dropping their guard. That's when you'll strike. And what about the Secretary of Defense? He's not going to sit by while one of his top colonels gets railroaded. I'll brief him, but we keep the circle tight. No one else. Hoffman's too close to base command. If we go wide, we lose control. Riggs stared at him for a long moment, the weight of the plan settling between them. You realize once this is done, your wife's going to prison. Your kids. They'll never look at you the same again. Morrison exhaled slowly, his shoulders heavy with the burden. They already don't. Securing permission the next morning, Morrison placed a secure call to the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense, William H. West, answered personally. Colonel Morrison, your message said urgent. I trust this isn't another false flag. Morrison wasted no time. Sir, Operation Silent Aegis is no longer theoretical. It's happening. Right here. Right now. And I'm the bait. There was a pause on the line. Then the secretary spoke, measured but intense. Go on. Morrison laid out the entire plan. Linda's betrayal, Hoffman's infiltration, the foreign handlers, and the trap he intended to spring. When he finished, the line went silent for a long moment. Morrison, the secretary finally said, his voice lower than usual, do you understand what you're asking me to authorize? You're suggesting we stage your arrest, destroy your reputation temporarily, and let a spy ring believe they've succeeded, just so we can expose their entire network. Yes, sir, Morrison replied, steady. Because it's the only way. The secretary sighed, a weight audible even over the secure line. If this fails, you'll be court-martialed, imprisoned, and your family. I'm aware, sir. Another pause. Then the secretary's voice hardened. Fine. You have my authorization. Full tactical support, limited to my office and Riggs. No one else. But listen carefully, Morrison. Yes, sir. This is going to break your family. Morrison closed his eyes. Sir, I believe my family's already broken. The secretary's tone softened slightly, the humanity returning for just a moment. Derrick, even if this works, even if we clear your name and take down the ring, your wife's betrayal will remain. And your children, they may never understand why you did this. They may hate you for the rest of their lives. Morrison said nothing for a long moment. His heart tightened like a vice, but his voice came out calm, certain. Duty first, sir. They'll have to live with it. The secretary's voice dropped to a quiet warning. Sometimes duty demands a price we can't pay back. Just remember that when this is over, you might win the war, but lose your family forever. Morrison's jaw tightened, but his resolve did not waver. I accept that risk, sir. The secretary exhaled, sharp and final. Then God help us both. Chapter 6. Fallout and Arrests. The federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. was a stark, sterile place where truth was dissected and loyalty laid bare. Flags hung from polished oak walls, but no banner could shield Colonel Derrick Morrison from the ache growing inside him. The trial of United States versus Linda Morrison and Captain Blake Hoffman had attracted national attention. Journalists filled the benches, typing furiously as classified operations and domestic betrayal spilled into the public eye. Uniformed officers from every branch of the military sat in grim silence, faces tight with disbelief. Linda sat at the defense table, her blonde hair pinned neatly back, wearing a navy blue suit instead of a prison jumpsuit. Her lawyer had argued for professional appearance to sway the jury. Blake Hoffman sat beside her, hands folded, his expression calm and cold as if none of this touched him. Derrick sat behind the prosecution bench, his uniform starched and crisp, but inside, he felt like a hollowed-out man. The evidence unfolds the prosecution moved with deadly precision. Surveillance footage showed secret rendezvous between Linda and Blake. Bank statements traced wire transfers to offshore accounts linked to known foreign intelligence handlers. Email transcripts detailed shipment schedules, troop deployments, and weapons testing data leaked straight from Morrison's locked files. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Keller, spoke without emotion. Captain Hoffman used his romantic involvement with the defendant Linda Morrison to manipulate her access to sensitive information. Together, they endangered national security, compromised missions abroad, and placed countless American lives at risk. Morrison watched as the damning evidence stacked higher, brick by brick, crushing any shadow of doubt. Linda sat still, her face unreadable. No tears, no remorse. The children take the stand, but no blow struck harder than when Amy and Tyler walked through the courtroom doors. Amy was barely 13, wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled into a ponytail. Tyler, smaller, in a blazer too big for his thin frame, clung to her hand like it was his only anchor. They took the witness stand, their voices trembling but determined. The defense attorney, a silver-tongued lawyer named Rosen, knelt beside them, speaking softly. "Amy, do you love your mother?" "Yes," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "She did what she thought was right." "And Tyler, did your mother ever scare you? Did she ever tell you to do bad things?" Tyler shook his head vigorously. "No, she told us Daddy was dangerous, that she had to protect us from what he was doing." The courtroom fell painfully silent. Keller stood. "Amy, are you aware your mother shared secret information with foreign enemies? She didn't mean to hurt anyone." Amy cried. She was scared. Blake told her she had to. If she didn't, something bad would happen to us. The words landed like a hammer on Morrison's chest. He gripped the edge of the bench until his knuckles turned white. Linda's plea when it was her turn to speak. Linda stood, composed yet vulnerable. "I am guilty of betraying my oath," she began, voice steady. "But I never meant to betray my family. I was coerced, manipulated. I believed I was protecting my children from a husband who lost himself in duty and forgot his family." She turned slightly, meeting Morrison's cold stare across the room. "I made terrible choices. I regret them every day. But please, don't take my children's mother away from them forever. They've already lost enough." Tears finally slipped down her cheeks, but Morrison saw them for what they were, either genuine remorse or another carefully rehearsed performance. He couldn't tell anymore. The verdict the jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, their foreman rose, voice firm. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty of espionage, conspiracy against the United States, and treason." The gavel struck like a thunderclap. The judge, his face grave, delivered the sentences. "Linda Morrison, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for your role in betraying national security. Blake Hoffman, you are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison." Linda gasped softly, closing her eyes as if absorbing the weight of her punishment. Blake sat unmoved, merely straightening his tie. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. The military officials bowed their heads in grim satisfaction, but Morrison felt no victory in the courtroom's hush. Justice had been served. But at what cost? The children's goodbye after the sentencing. The guards approached to cuff Linda. She turned toward the defense table, her arms stretched for one last embrace. "Please, let me hug them," she whispered to the bailiff. The judge gave a weary nod. Amy and Tyler ran forward, throwing their arms around their mother, sobbing into her shoulders. "It's going to be okay," Linda whispered, voice cracking. "I love you so much. Be strong for me, okay? Don't listen to what they say about me. You know my heart." Morrison watched from a distance, the divide between them as wide as an ocean. Amy turned and glared at him, tears streaming down her face. "You did this to her. You destroyed our family." Tyler nodded through his sobs, his voice breaking. "I hate you, Dad." The words sliced through Morrison, sharper than any bullet. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Linda smiled sadly at him, cuffed and broken, but still triumphant in the way that mattered most. She had taken their children's hearts with her. The bailiff gently pulled Amy and Tyler away, their cries echoing in the quiet courtroom as Linda was led through the side door, the steel clink of handcuffs the only sound in the room. The lonely victor when the courtroom finally emptied. Morrison remained seated, staring at the empty witness stand where his children had taken the oath. He had saved the nation from betrayal, exposed the spy ring, protected countless soldiers from harm. But none of it filled the void left behind. Victory had never felt so hollow. Chapter 7. The Family Shattered. In the weeks after the trial, the Morrison household fell silent. Gone were the sounds of children's laughter, the quiet hum of family life, and even the arguments that had once filled these walls with messy humanity. All that remained was silence, and Derrick Morrison, alone with his memories and regrets, though he'd tell himself otherwise. He stood in his study, staring at the family portrait still hanging above the fireplace. Amy's smile, Tyler's gap-toothed grin, Linda's hand resting gently on his shoulder. He picked up a glass of scotch and threw it against the photo. The frame shattered, glass raining down like shards of his former life. From that moment, Derrick made his decision. The family he knew was dead. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness. Amy and Tyler had chosen their side when they called him a monster in court. To him, they were no longer his children. They were collateral damage in a war they would never understand. Exiled by choice, Amy and Tyler were placed in the temporary care of Linda's younger sister, Margaret Doyle, a soft-spoken woman who worked as a nurse in Virginia. Margaret had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to hold the family together during deployments and holidays. She called Derrick once, her voice shaking. "Derrick, the kids are scared. They're confused. They miss their mother. Please, talk to them. They need their father now more than ever." But Derrick's voice was cold and final. "They made their choice. So did Linda. You take them. Keep them away from me. Derrick, please. They're children." He ended the call without another word. From then on, Margaret struggled to care for them. Between her long hospital shifts, rising debts, and mounting medical bills, raising two grieving, angry children was more than she could handle. Derrick knew it wouldn't last, and he made sure of it. The quiet sabotage behind the walls of the Pentagon, Morrison still held influence. Quiet words in the right ears, subtle delays in Margaret's loan approvals, tax audits, an anonymous complaint to Child Services questioning her fitness as a guardian. It was never traced back to him, but it didn't have to be. Within months, Margaret lost custody. The state intervened. Amy and Tyler were placed into the foster system. Morrison didn't attend the hearing. He didn't send a lawyer. He didn't even read the final reports. They were no longer his concern. Amy's fall foster care was a cold and uncaring place for a girl like Amy. Once a bright student with dreams of becoming a veterinarian, she now drifted from home to home, her school record stained by absences and fights. By 16, she was pregnant. The father, a boy 2 years older who vanished the moment he heard the word baby. In a rundown apartment on the edge of Richmond, Amy gave birth alone, clutching her newborn daughter in a freezing hospital room. No flowers, no family, no congratulations, just survival. She dropped out of school and worked double shifts at a gas station, barely affording formula and rent. Welfare checks came late. Rent collectors came early. On her loneliest nights, she stared out the cracked window, wondering if her father even knew she existed anymore. He did. Derrick received the social services report weeks earlier. He closed the file without a second thought. Tyler's spiral Tyler fared no better, bouncing from one foster home to the next, each more temporary than the last. He grew bitter and restless. Trouble found him early: vandalism, petty theft, truancy. By 14, he was arrested for breaking into a liquor store with a group of older boys. When the police called to report his arrest, Morrison gave them a single, curt response: "Not my responsibility." Tyler spent his next birthdays behind the concrete walls of juvenile detention, nursing his anger like a wound that would never heal. He spoke often of the man who abandoned him. "He was a soldier before he was a father," Tyler told his cellmate one night. "And now he's neither." A distant observer through it all, Morrison watched from a distance. Surveillance reports, social worker evaluations, school records, they passed across his desk like mission briefings. Every so often, Tony Riggs would walk in, dropping the files onto Morrison's desk with a weary sigh. "You're still having them monitored?" Tony asked one afternoon. "These kids now lost, broken kids." Morrison didn't look up from his paperwork. "I monitor threats, Tony. even small ones. They're not threats. They're your kids. No, Morrison said, finally locking eyes with him. They stopped being my kids the day they chose her over me. Tony shook his head, disgusted. You're punishing them for a choice they never understood. Morrison's voice was flat, final. They made it all the same. And with that, he turned the page of his report and dismissed the matter like any other security risk. Unmoved, years passed, but Morrison never softened. Promotions came and went, awards were pinned to his chest, and younger soldiers saluted him with reverence and fear. But behind the accolades stood a man who had buried his own family beneath the rubble of duty and betrayal. Once, late at night, he stood at a high-rise window overlooking the cold streets below. In the distance, under a flickering street lamp, a young girl walked with a baby in her arms, Amy, now 17, her face drawn and tired. Across town, a teenage boy with a fresh bruise beneath his eyes sat on a park bench, counting the hours before his next hearing, Tyler, alone in a system that had failed him. Morrison watched them through the scope of a surveillance drone feed, his face unreadable. They were shadows now, ghosts of a life long gone. He closed the laptop and turned away, leaving them behind once more. Chapter 8. The Cold Refusal. Years had passed since the courtroom's final verdict echoed through the chambers of Derrick Morrison's life. The seasons changed, promotions came and went, but some scars never healed. None deeper than the one left by his wife, Linda, the woman who had shattered his trust, betrayed his country, and fractured their family beyond repair. Now, news came in that no one could ignore. Linda Morrison was gravely ill. The prison doctor's report arrived at Morrison's desk in a crisp, sealed envelope. The diagnosis was bleak and unambiguous: terminal cancer, aggressive and untreatable given her conditions behind bars. For a moment, Derrick stared at the words, unmoving, his cold gray eyes betraying nothing. The woman who had once been his wife, the mother of his children, was dying. Yet, to him, it was simply another chapter in a story of consequences. A petition for compassion weeks later, a formal request landed on his desk from Linda's attorney, an urgent petition for compassionate release. She wished to spend her final days with her children, to mend the broken ties she had torn apart before death closed the door forever. The request outlined her declining health, the prognosis from multiple medical experts, and her desperate hope to see Amy and Tyler one last time. Margaret Doyle, Linda's sister and temporary guardian of the children for so long, had rallied for the plea, writing letters and sending photographs of the twins, now young adults with their own struggles, to the prison board and the military review committee. The petition tugged at the fabric of decency. But Morrison's heart, wrapped in steel and shadow, saw only betrayal. He convened a private meeting with his most trusted aides and made his decision. There will be no release, he declared, voice resolute and final. No exceptions. One of his aides hesitated. Sir, the petition has public support. Denying it could tarnish your reputation. Morrison's lips curled in a faint, bitter smile. Reputation is a currency I spent long ago. With his influence, the request was buried, stalled indefinitely in bureaucratic limbo, all hope extinguished before it could reach the Secretary of Defense's desk. The final meeting, arranged months later, a guarded notice arrived. Linda's health had worsened dramatically. The prison agreed to one last visit under strict supervision. Amy and Tyler were notified, and despite everything, they chose to attend. Morrison, too, received the order to appear. As the commanding officer, it was protocol, but he approached the meeting like a man walking into a funeral. On the appointed day, the visiting room was bleak, cold linoleum floors, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and two small tables bolted to the floor. The only window was reinforced glass separating the visitors from the inmates. Derrick entered first, stiff as a statue. Amy and Tyler sat quietly, eyes swollen but determined. And then, through the glass partition, Linda appeared, frail, her face gaunt and pale beneath thinning hair. Their eyes met. Words that echoed Derrick. Linda's voice was thin, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of pain and regret. Thank you for coming. He nodded curtly, his expression unreadable. Amy's voice broke the silence. "Mom, you look so weak." Linda smiled faintly. "Cancer doesn't care about guilt or innocence, Amy. It just takes." Tyler looked away, swallowing hard. Linda pressed her hand to the glass. "I'm sorry. For everything." Derrick's eyes darkened. "Sorry doesn't undo treason. It doesn't fix broken lives." Linda's lips trembled. "I know, but I want you to do one thing for me. Please care for our children. Look after Amy and Tyler. They have a baby on the way. A grandchild you've never met." Derrick's jaw tightened. The mention of the unborn child hit him harder than he expected, but he masked it with cold resolve. "They're not my responsibility anymore." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she fought to keep her composure. "They're your blood, Derrick, whether you want them or not." He met her gaze with a chilling finality. "Betrayal has consequences, Linda. You made your choice. So did they." The silence that follows the room fell into heavy silence. Amy and Tyler's faces crumpled, the weight of their father's rejection more crushing than any prison sentence. Linda squeezed a hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. The guards gently stepped forward, signaling the end of the visit. As she was escorted away, Linda looked back one last time, a silent plea in her eyes that went unanswered. Derrick stood motionless, watching her retreat until the door clanged shut. In that cold room, surrounded by the harsh reality of loss and unforgiving duty, Morrison made peace with the fact that some wounds would never heal and some bridges were meant to burn. Chapter 9. Final Severance. The prison infirmary was sterile and cold, the faint smell of antiseptic hanging in the air like a shroud. Linda Morrison lay on a narrow cot, her frail body emaciated by months of terminal cancer. The once vibrant woman who had shattered a family was now little more than a shadow, her eyes sunken but still fiercely alive. Despite the pain that racked her body, she found strength in one final act: writing a letter. Her hand trembled as she gripped the pen, ink bleeding slowly onto the paper as she poured out the words she'd never dared say aloud. "My dear Amy and Tyler, if you're reading this, it means I am gone. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you, for the choices I made that broke our family and changed your lives forever. I want you to understand, no matter what you think, I never stopped loving you. I was afraid of losing you, afraid of Derrick, afraid of the world I no longer understood. I made mistakes, terrible ones, but every day I spent in that prison cell, I prayed for a chance to say goodbye, to ask your forgiveness. I'm proud of you both, braver than I ever was. And Amy, a grandchild? You have no idea how much I long to hold that baby, to tell them stories of better days. Please forgive me, not for what I did, but for what I could not do. With all my love." Mom, the letter was folded carefully, sealed with a trembling kiss on the paper's corner. Linda summoned a guard she trusted, a kind woman named Angela, to deliver it to Amy and Tyler. "I want them to know," Linda whispered hoarsely. "They deserve the truth." Angela nodded, eyes glistening with sympathy. "I'll see it gets to them, ma'am." The interception. But fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to Linda, Derrick Morrison had long since placed surveillance on all correspondence to his children. His lingering bitterness, cold and unyielding, refused to loosen its grip. When a letter arrived at the military mailroom, an officer assigned by Derrick intercepted it. He recognized the handwriting immediately, Linda's script, unmistakable and haunting. With a swift, ruthless hand, the letter was opened, read, and then torn into pieces. The scraps were burned in the secure incinerator, disappearing in smoke and ash. When Angela came to check on the delivery, she was told curtly no such letter arrived. She glanced toward the mailroom door, suspicion flickering in her eyes, but said nothing. The death. Days later, Linda's breathing grew shallow, each inhale a battle against the relentless disease. Amy and Tyler were informed. They arrived at the prison to see their mother one last time, frail and almost unrecognizable. She reached out with trembling fingers. "I love you," she whispered. "Please be strong." But Derrick was not present for this farewell. He had excused himself, citing pressing military duties. In truth, he was already preparing for the final erasure. Linda passed quietly that night, alone except for the prison nurse holding her hand. No funeral, no farewell. Derrick oversaw every detail of what followed. There would be no public funeral, no memorial service, no marker to remember the woman who had once been his wife. When Margaret Doyle, Linda's sister, requested a modest service, her request was denied. "There is no standing for traitors," Morrison said coldly in a brief phone call. The body was cremated discreetly, ashes scattered far from any family plots, a secret erased without ceremony. No obituary appeared in the papers. No friends or family were called to mourn. The last severance. Amy and Tyler received no notice of their mother's passing until weeks later, through a generic letter from the prison administration. No details, no condolences, only the cold facts. Amy read the letter aloud to Tyler in their sparse apartment, tears streaming. "She's gone," Amy said softly, "and no one told us." Tyler clenched his fists. Like we never mattered. Derrick sat alone in his office late that evening, the weight of silence pressing down on him. Somewhere far away, the children were grieving a mother he had allowed to die forgotten, and he felt nothing. The last thread connecting him to the family he once had been severed, and he did not try to grasp it. Duty had won. Betrayal had been punished. And the past was buried, where it would remain, forgotten, severed, and cold. Chapter 10. Alone at the top. The grand hall was filled with the stiff buzz of uniforms, the crisp gleam of metals reflecting off polished brass, and the muted murmur of high-ranking officers gathered to honor one of their own. The occasion was a military ceremony, meticulously planned to celebrate the promotion of Colonel Derrick Morrison to the rank of general, the pinnacle of a decorated career. Yet beneath the veneer of triumph lay a man profoundly alone. Derrick stood tall, his posture rigid, every inch the embodiment of military discipline. The applause that greeted his name rolled like thunder through the hall, yet it failed to stir anything but a hollow echo inside him. His face was calm, unyielding, the face of a leader revered for decades of service, a man who had shaped countless soldiers into warriors. But inside, a storm raged. The war he'd won on the battlefield had left his personal world in ruins. The price of glory. After the ceremony, Morrison moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging polite words. His voice was steady, authoritative, but there was no warmth in it. Officers bowed their heads in respect, calling him sir, and whispering tales of his valor and iron will. Yet not a single one could see the man behind the medals, the man who'd sacrificed everything. General Harrison, a grizzled veteran with a weathered face, caught Morrison's arm in a hearty grip. "Derrick, you earned every bit of this. The Army's lucky to have you." Morrison nodded, forcing a tight smile. "Thank you, General. It's been an honor." As Harrison moved on to greet others, Morrison's eyes scanned the room, searching in vain for any familiar face. No wife, no children, no family waiting to celebrate his achievement. He remembered the last time he had seen Amy and Tyler, distant, estranged, broken by years without a father's guidance. He recalled the cold refusal, the severed ties, and the letter he'd destroyed. The grandchild he'd never met. A pang of something unfamiliar struck his chest, but he swallowed it back, hardened by years of self-imposed exile. Amy struggles. Across town, in a cramped apartment cluttered with baby clothes and bills, Amy Morrison tried to keep her life from unraveling. At 22, she was a single mother raising her infant daughter while juggling 2 part-time jobs. Exhaustion lined her face like deep creases. Her phone buzzed, a message from her Aunt Margaret, who still tried to be a lifeline despite everything. "How's the baby? Need help with daycare? You're stronger than you know." Amy sighed, grateful yet burdened by the absence of any real support. Without Derrick's influence or love, every day was a battle against poverty, exhaustion, and the whispers of judgment from those around her. Her dreams of becoming a veterinarian had faded under the harsh light of reality. The only future she could envision was survival, just one day at a time. Tyler's lost path. Meanwhile, Tyler, now 20, sat in a drab room in a halfway house for young adults with troubled pasts. A fresh bruise colored his cheek from a recent altercation. The juvenile arrests had given way to court hearings and probation, but hope was a scarce commodity. He flipped through a worn photo album, pictures of his mother before the fall, pictures of Amy cradling the baby, and a single, faded image of Derrick in uniform, stern and unyielding. "Where were you?" Tyler whispered to the photograph. "When I needed you the most." His anger burned hot, but simmered beneath a numb resignation. Without his father's guidance, the road ahead was uncertain, littered with missteps and missed chances. A legacy of duty. Back at the military base, Morrison returned to his office, a sparse room lined with books on strategy, leadership, and history. His awards glinted in glass cases, a testament to a lifetime of service. Yet the silence there was suffocating. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and stared out the window at the sprawling grounds below. The troops marched in precise formation, disciplined and loyal. His legacy was written in their actions. But the cost was written in the empty chair at his family's table, in the absence of laughter and love. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, he sat alone in his dimly lit office, the weight of years pressing down on him. The walls seemed to close in, haunted by memories of betrayal, loss, and choices made in the name of duty. Haunted by the past, his mind drifted to the past, the day the military police arrested him at Reveille, the moment Linda's betrayal shattered his world, the courtroom where his own children testified against him, and the countless nights of cold refusals and severed ties. He remembered the Secretary of Defense's warning. Sometimes duty demands a price we can't pay back. That price had been paid in full. He was a man who had won battles abroad, but lost wars at home. The ceremony's final moment. The next morning, the military ceremony that had crowned his career replayed in his thoughts. As he stood on the stage, receiving the insignia of general, every eye in the hall watched in admiration. Yet none saw the man trapped beneath the accolades, the man who stood alone, a monument to sacrifice and sorrow. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding. Officers saluted with crisp precision. His peers whispered tales of his leadership and courage. But Morrison's gaze drifted to the empty seats reserved for family. No wife, no children, no future grandchildren. In that moment, he realized that all the honors in the world could never fill the void left by the family he had lost. A quiet farewell. As the applause faded and the ceremony closed, Morrison stepped down from the dais. A young officer approached to congratulate him. "General Morrison, you're an inspiration to us all." He nodded politely, voice soft but firm. "Thank you. But the greatest battles are often fought in silence, away from the spotlight." The officer looked puzzled. Morrison gave a small, bitter smile. "And sometimes victory means standing alone." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the ceremony behind. The final reflection. Alone at the top, Derrick Morrison carried his medals like weights, symbols of glory, reminders of sacrifice, and scars that no honor could heal. He had achieved greatness. He had served his country with unwavering resolve. But in the quiet hours, when the hallways emptied and the world fell away, he was left only with memories of a family shattered by betrayal, choices made, and a duty that demanded everything.